The scrawny Mutt showed up on Sarah Redford's doorstep during the coldest Montana winter of 1878, all ribs and matted fur, with eyes that held more wariness than hope. She found him collapsed against her cabin door one February morning, shivering so violently she thought he might shake apart, and despite every practical bone in her body telling her to leave the creature be, she couldn't turn away from something so clearly desperate to survive. Within minutes, she had him wrapped in her only spare blanket by the fire, melting snow in a pot for water, and wondering what possessed her to take in another mouth to feed when she barely had enough provisions to see herself through until spring. The dog didn't trust her at first. He flinched when she moved too quickly, growled low in his throat when she reached toward him, and watched her with those calculating amber eyes as if expecting a blow at any moment. Sarah understood that kind of fear. She had worn it herself for 3 years of marriage to a man whose fists spoke louder than his words, until a fever took him the previous autumn and left her alone in this isolated cabin 15 miles from the nearest settlement. Some women might have mourned. Sarah had simply survived, same as she always did. "You can stay until you are strong enough to leave," she told the dog on that first night, ladling warm broth from her meager stew into a shallow bowl. "But I am not looking for company, and I cannot afford sentiment. Understood?" The dog lapped at the broth with desperate hunger, and Sarah turned away before she could feel too much satisfaction at the sight. Sentiment was a luxury she had learned to abandon long ago. 3 days passed before the dog could stand without trembling. A week before, he stopped flinching at her approach. Sarah kept her distance as much as the small cabin allowed, focusing on her own survival, on the firewood that needed splitting and the traps that needed checking, and the endless battle against the cold that seeped through every crack in the walls. But she found herself talking to the dog anyway, filling the silence with observations about the weather and complaints about her dwindling supplies and memories she hadn't spoken aloud in years. "I named you Jasper," she announced one morning, more to hear her own voice than anything else. "My father had a dog by that name when I was small. He was loyal and smart, and he died protecting our chickens from a fox. Seems fitting enough." Jasper tilted his head at the sound of his new name, and something in Sarah's chest loosened just slightly. By the time the worst of winter began to break in late March, Jasper had filled out enough that Sarah could see he was part shepherd, part something larger and shaggier, with a thick coat that would serve him well in the mountain climate. He followed her everywhere now, from the woodpile to the creek to the small root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin. When she checked her trap lines, he ranged ahead, his nose to the ground, alert for any danger. When she split wood, he sat nearby, watching the tree line with focused attention. "You're going to make yourself useful or just ornamental?" she asked him one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow despite the lingering chill in the air. Her arms ached from swinging the axe, and her stores of firewood were still lower than she liked. Jasper's ears perked forward, and he rose to his feet with a low growl that made the hair on Sarah's neck stand up. She followed his gaze toward the pine trees that crowded close to the cabin's southern side, and saw nothing at first. Then movement, a flash of buckskin and dark hair, and a man emerged from the shadows on a massive bay horse that looked better fed than any creature had a right to be this early in the season. Sarah's hand went automatically to the rifle she kept propped against the woodpile, but she didn't raise it. Not yet. The man sat his horse with easy confidence, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with hair that fell past his collar and a thick beard that couldn't quite hide the strong lines of his jaw. He wore furs and leather, and a knife nearly as long as Sarah's forearm hung from his belt. Everything about him spoke of strength and capability and the kind of self-reliance that came from years of surviving alone in harsh country. "Easy," he said, and Sarah realized with a start that he was addressing the dog, not her. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together, but not unkind. "I mean no harm." "Then you can state your business and move along," Sarah said, proud that her voice came out steady and hard. She had learned not to show weakness to strange men, no matter how tired or frightened she might be. The man's dark eyes shifted from Jasper to Sarah, and she felt the weight of his assessment. She knew what he saw, a woman of 26 who looked older, worn thin by hardship, with brown hair pulled back in a severe knot and a face that had forgotten how to smile. Her dress was patched and faded, and her hands were rough with calluses. Nothing about her invited softness or pity. "Name is Caleb Winters," the man said after a moment. "I have a cabin about 8 miles northwest of here, up in the high country. I was tracking a wounded elk and saw your smoke. Wanted to make sure whoever was here made it through the winter." "We managed," Sarah said shortly. "Thank you for your concern." Caleb Winters studied her a moment longer, then his gaze dropped to Jasper, who had stopped growling but remained tense and watchful. "That's a good dog. Shepherd mix, I suppose? You train him yourself?" "He is just a stray I took in. Nothing special about him." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Caleb's mouth, though it was hard to tell beneath the beard. "A stray that is guarding you like you are the most precious thing in these mountains. That is something special enough." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she hated herself for it. She was not some simpering girl to be rattled by a few words from a stranger. "Is there something you need, Mr. Winters? Or are you just in the habit of wandering around bothering your neighbors?" This time, the smile was unmistakable, brief but genuine. "Just being neighborly, Mrs. Miss Redford." The lie came automatically. Let him think her a spinster rather than a widow. It was safer that way, simpler. "Miss Redford," Caleb repeated, inclining his head. "I will leave you to your work. But if you need anything as the thaw comes, my offer of help stands. These mountains can be unpredictable this time of year." He turned his horse before Sarah could respond, and she watched him ride back into the trees with a mixture of relief and something she refused to name. Jasper remained alert until the sound of hoofbeats faded entirely, then looked up at Sarah as if waiting for her judgment. "We do not need his help," she told the dog firmly. "We do not need anyone." But 3 weeks later, when the creek behind her cabin swelled with snowmelt and flooded her root cellar, destroying half her remaining provisions, Sarah found herself thinking of Caleb Winters and his offer. She stood in the muddy wreckage of her carefully stored potatoes and carrots, feeling the weight of defeat settle over her shoulders, and knew she had a choice to make: pride or survival. "Damn it all," she whispered, and Jasper pressed against her leg in silent support. The next morning, she set out northwest with Jasper at her side and her rifle across her back, following the high country trails that she hoped would lead to Caleb Winters's cabin. The spring sun was warm on her face, but the nights were still cold enough to kill, and she had no illusions about what starvation looked like. She had come too close to it already. She found his cabin near midday, nestled in a small valley surrounded by towering pines, with a clear creek running nearby, and a view that stretched for miles. It was larger than her own cabin, sturdily built with chinked logs and a stone chimney, and she could see a substantial woodpile and what looked like a small barn or stable. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. Before she could call out, Jasper barked once, sharp and warning, and the cabin door opened. Caleb Winters stepped out, and Sarah was struck again by the sheer size of him. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and his shoulders seemed to fill the entire space. Without the heavy furs he had worn before, she could see the powerful muscles of his arms and chest beneath his worn cotton shirt, the kind of strength that came from years of hard physical labor. "Miss Redford," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "I did not expect to see you again." "My root cellar flooded," Sarah said without preamble, hating how the words tasted like failure. "I lost most of my stores. I thought perhaps you might know where I could trade for supplies or work for food." Caleb's expression shifted to concern, and he descended the porch steps with easy grace despite his size. "Come inside. We will talk about what you need." Sarah hesitated, old warnings echoing in her mind about the dangers of being alone with strange men in isolated places. But Jasper had already trotted forward to sniff at Caleb's extended hand, tail wagging slightly, and she found herself trusting the dog's instincts more than her own fears. The inside of Caleb's cabin was warm and surprisingly neat, with a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and shelves lined with supplies that made Sarah's mouth water. Dried meat, sacks of flour and beans, jars of preserved vegetables, even a small barrel that might have been salted fish. He lived like a man who knew how to prepare for harsh winters and harder times. "Sit," Caleb said, gesturing to the table. "Have you eaten today?" "I did not come here for charity," Sarah said stiffly, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Caleb's expression softened. "It is not charity to feed a neighbor. Please, sit." She sat mostly because her legs were tired from the long walk, and watched as he moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he had bread and cheese and dried venison on the table, along with water from a clay pitcher. Sarah tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but hunger won out, and she found herself devouring the food like she hadn't eaten in days, which was not far from the truth. Jasper sat at her feet, and she slipped him pieces of meat when she thought Caleb wasn't looking. From the small smile on the mountain man's face, he noticed but chose not to comment. "How bad is the damage?" Caleb asked when she had finally slowed down. "Nearly everything except some dried beans and a little cornmeal," Sarah admitted. "I can make it another few weeks on what I have, but then—" She trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. "I have a proposition for you," he finally said. "I do a lot of trapping and hunting, but I'm not skilled at preserving hides and making them ready for trade. If you know tanning and sewing, you could work for me here. I would provide room and board, and when the trading post opens again in early summer, we split the profits from whatever we sell. You would have enough to restock your cabin and see yourself through next winter." Sarah stared at him, trying to find the trap in the offer, the hidden price she would be expected to pay. "Why would you do that?" "Because I need the help, and you need the supplies," Caleb said simply. "And because I know what it is like to be alone in these mountains without enough resources. I nearly starved my first winter here, and if not for a kind stranger who taught me how to trap and hunt properly, I would not have survived. I figure I owe some of that kindness forward. I would be staying here, in your cabin. You would have your own room. I built two, thinking I might eventually bring my sister out from Kansas, but she married instead and stayed east." He met her eyes directly. "I will not touch you, Miss Redford. You have my word on that. And your dog there looks like he would tear my throat out if I tried anything improper, so you have a witness and a guardian." Despite herself, Sarah felt a smile tug at her lips. "Jasper is protective." "Jasper," Caleb repeated, and the dog's ears perked up. "Good strong name for a good strong dog. So what do you say? Will you accept my offer?" Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to her hard-won independence and find another way. But there was no other way, not really, and she was tired of fighting alone. "I accept," she heard herself say, "but only until I can afford my own supplies. Then I return to my own cabin." "Agreed," Caleb said, and extended his hand across the table. Sarah shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm that matched her own, and wondered what she had just gotten herself into. The first week was awkward. Caleb showed her to a small room at the back of the cabin, simply furnished with a bed frame and straw mattress, a wooden chest, and a window that looked out over the valley. It was more space than she had at her own cabin, and the bed was actually comfortable. Jasper claimed a spot on the floor beside her and refused to budge, standing guard even as she slept. During the days, Caleb taught her his system for processing the hides and furs he had collected over the winter. She already knew the basics of tanning, but his methods were more efficient, designed for the volume of work he produced. They fell into a rhythm of quiet cooperation, working side by side as the spring days grew longer and warmer. He would scrape and flesh the hides, and she would treat them with the brain-tanning solution and stretch them properly for drying. The work was hard and messy, but Sarah found she didn't mind. It was purposeful in a way that her lonely struggles at her own cabin had not been, and Caleb was an easy person to work alongside. He didn't fill the silence with meaningless chatter, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and often laced with dry humor that surprised her into laughter more than once. Jasper thrived in the new environment. With more food and consistent care, he grew stronger and more confident, and Caleb began working with him deliberately, teaching the dog to respond to commands and hand signals. "You have a gift for this," Sarah observed one evening as she watched Caleb put Jasper through a series of exercises in the clearing in front of the cabin. The dog sat, stayed, came on command, and was learning to patrol a perimeter and alert to strangers. "Had dogs growing up," Caleb said, rewarding Jasper with a piece of dried meat. "My father bred hunting dogs back in Missouri before he died. I learned young that a good dog is worth 10 men in the wilderness." "What brought you out here?" Sarah asked, then immediately regretted the personal question, but Caleb didn't seem offended. "War," he said simply. "Fought for the Union, saw things no man should see. When it ended, I couldn't go back to farming and pretending the world was normal again. So I came west, kept moving until I found a place that felt far enough away from everything. Sarah understood that impulse more than she wanted to admit. The mountains are good for that, being far away. Caleb's dark eyes found hers across the clearing, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared wounds neither of them wanted to speak aloud. That they are, he agreed quietly. As April turned to May, the valley came alive with wildflowers and new growth. Sarah found herself spending more time outdoors, helping Caleb with his garden plot and enjoying the simple pleasure of sunshine on her face. Jasper was constantly in motion, exploring every corner of the property, chasing rabbits he never quite caught, and always circling back to check on Sarah before ranging out again. "He is devoted to you," Caleb said one afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of fence around the garden. "I have never seen a dog bond so strongly so fast." "I fed him when he was starving," Sarah said with a shrug. "He is loyal to the source of food." "It is more than that." Caleb hammered a post into the ground with powerful, precise strikes. "Dogs know who they belong to, who belongs to them. Jasper chose you." The words settled into Sarah's chest with unexpected warmth. She had spent so long believing she was alone, unwanted, a burden at best and an inconvenience at worst. The idea that this scruffy mutt had chosen her, had decided she was worth protecting and staying beside, felt like a gift she didn't quite know how to accept. "Well," she said, clearing her throat against the sudden tightness, "I suppose I chose him too." Caleb smiled, and Sarah noticed not for the first time how it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing something almost boyish beneath the beard and weathered skin. He was a handsome man, she realized with a start. Powerfully built, yes, all broad shoulders and muscled arms and capable hands, but there was a gentleness to him as well, a quiet kindness that made her feel safer than she had in years. The realization unsettled her. She could not afford to feel things for Caleb Winters. This arrangement was temporary, practical, nothing more. But as the weeks passed, Sarah found it increasingly difficult to maintain that distance. Caleb was simply too easy to be around, too thoughtful in small ways that caught her off guard. He always served her the larger portion at meals. He split the heavier work and never made her feel weak for struggling with tasks that came easily to his considerable strength. He asked her opinion on things and actually listened to her answers. And he respected the boundaries they had established, never once making her feel uncomfortable or unsafe in his presence. It had been so long since Sarah had been treated with basic human decency that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. The realization made her angry at first, bitter at all the years she had wasted with a man who had seen her as property rather than a person. But slowly, that anger gave way to something softer, something that felt dangerously like hope. One evening in late May, a storm rolled in with shocking suddenty, turning the sky black and unleashing rain in heavy sheets that drummed against the cabin roof. Sarah and Caleb had been working outside when the first drops fell, and they barely made it inside before the deluge began. They stood dripping in the doorway, laughing at their sodden state, and Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time she had laughed like this, free and genuine and unguarded. "We look like drowned rats," she said, pushing wet hair back from her face. "Speak for yourself," Caleb said with mock offense. "I look ruggedly weather-beaten." "You look soaked through and ridiculous." "Well, you look—" He trailed off, his expression shifting to something Sarah couldn't quite read. "You look beautiful." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and she became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way Caleb's wet shirt clung to the powerful muscles of his chest and arms, of the intensity in his dark eyes. "Caleb," she whispered, not sure if she was warning him or encouraging him. He took a step back, running a hand through his wet hair. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." "No," Sarah said quickly. "I mean, yes, perhaps it was inappropriate, but I do not want you to apologize for it." Caleb went very still. "Sarah?" The sound of her name on his lips without the formal Miss Redford sent warmth flooding through her. "I'm not who you think I am," she found herself saying. "I told you I was a spinster, but that was a lie. I was married for 3 years to a man who hurt me. He died last autumn, and I felt nothing but relief. I am damaged goods, Caleb. I am broken in ways I am not sure can be fixed." "You are not broken," Caleb said fiercely, closing the distance between them again. "You are strong and capable, and you survived something that would have destroyed a lesser person. There is nothing damaged about you." Tears burned in Sarah's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "You do not know what you are saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." His large hands came up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. "I know that I have been half in love with you since the day you showed up here, too proud to beg but desperate enough to ask for help anyway. I know that watching you gentle that dog and bring him back from the edge of death showed me more about your character than 1,000 words could. And I know that if you will have me, if you will take a chance on a broken-down soldier who ran away to the mountains, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again." Caleb. His name was half prayer, half plea. "Tell me to stop and I will," he said quietly. "Tell me you want me to step back and I will respect that. But if there is any part of you that wants this, that wants me, please let me show you what you deserve." Sarah made her choice. She rose up on her toes and kissed him, pouring years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into the press of her lips against his. Caleb responded immediately, one arm banding around her waist to pull her close, while his other hand cradled the back of her head with infinite care. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was worth cherishing, and Sarah felt something inside her that had been frozen for years finally begin to thaw. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered, "not as a worker or a temporary arrangement. Stay here with me. Build a life with me." "I do not know how to do that," Sarah admitted. "I do not know how to trust this." "Then we will learn together." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I just needed you to know what I want, what I hope for. The rest we can figure out as we go." Sarah nodded, her heart too full for words. Across the room, Jasper watched them from his spot by the fire, tail thumping against the floor in approval. She caught his eye and couldn't help but smile. That Mutt had brought her here, had guarded her and given her the confidence to ask for help when she needed it most. And in doing so, he had led her to this moment, to this man, to the possibility of something she had never dared imagine. "Thank you," she whispered to the dog. Jasper's tail thumped harder, and Caleb laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I think he approves." "He has good instincts," Sarah said, leaning into the solid warmth of Caleb's chest. "That he does." The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, Sarah felt safer and more content than she had in her entire life. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face, she knew she would not face them alone. She had Caleb, she had Jasper, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had hope. The following weeks unfolded like a dream Sarah was afraid to wake from. She and Caleb continued their work partnership, but now it was layered with a growing intimacy that made even the mundane tasks feel special. He would brush his hand against hers when passing tools. She would find excuses to stand close to him while they worked. And in the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future, with Jasper sprawled between them like a furry chaperone. Caleb told her about his childhood in Missouri, about loving parents who had instilled in him a strong moral code and a deep respect for hard work. He spoke of the war years with careful restraint, sharing only what he could bear to remember, and Sarah understood the weight of those silences. She shared her own story in pieces, the controlling father who had married her off at 18 to a man twice her age, the years of walking on eggshells and learning to make herself small and invisible, the complicated grief of mourning not the man but the life she might have had if circumstances had been different. "I do not miss him," she confessed one night, staring into the flames. "Does that make me heartless?" "It makes you honest," Caleb said, reaching over to lace his fingers through hers. "You cannot mourn what was never really there, but you can grieve the time that was stolen from you, the chances you did not get. That is worth mourning." His understanding, his complete lack of judgment, made Sarah fall a little more in love with him each day. Because she was falling in love, she could admit that now. Not the desperate clinging need she had felt in her marriage, but something steadier and stronger, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Caleb made her laugh. He challenged her opinions and listened when she pushed back. He was patient with her moments of fear and doubt, never forcing her to move faster than she was ready. And he adored Jasper, which somehow made Sarah love him even more. The two of them would spend hours working with the dog, teaching him increasingly complex commands and tasks. Caleb built a proper doghouse near the cabin, though Jasper still preferred to sleep on the floor beside Sarah's bed. He made sure the dog always had enough food and fresh water. And one memorable afternoon, Sarah came upon Caleb lying in the grass with Jasper sprawled across his broad chest, both of them dozing in the sun, and the sight had made her chest ache with tenderness. By early June, when the trading post in the nearest settlement sent word that they were ready for business, Sarah and Caleb had accumulated an impressive collection of tanned hides and furs ready for sale. They loaded up Caleb's wagon with their goods, brought Jasper along for protection, and made the 2-day journey down from the mountains. The settlement was barely worthy of the name, just a handful of rough buildings clustered around a muddy main street, but after months of isolation, it felt overwhelming to Sarah. She stayed close to Caleb as they navigated through the crowds of miners, trappers, and prospectors, grateful for his solid presence beside her. The trading post owner, a grizzled man named Henderson, examined their goods with a critical eye before nodding his approval. "Fine work," he said. "Best tanning I've seen in months. You do this yourself, Winters?" "My partner did most of it," Caleb said, gesturing to Sarah. "She has the skill for it." Henderson's eyebrows rose. "A woman did this work? Well, I will be damned. My apologies, miss. You have quite a talent." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, sir." They negotiated a fair price and walked away with more money than Sarah had seen in years. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, Caleb turned to her with a smile. "We make a good team." "We do," Sarah agreed, and meant it in more ways than one. That evening they stayed at the settlement's only boarding house, taking 2 rooms to maintain propriety, even though Sarah would have preferred to stay close to Caleb. The walls were thin enough that she could hear him moving around in the next room, and the knowledge that he was near helped settle her nerves. In the morning, before they left town, Caleb surprised her by stopping at the small general store. "I want to get you something," he said. "You do not need to do that. We just made good money together." "I know I do not need to. I want to." He guided her inside, and Sarah found herself standing before a small selection of women's clothing. Nothing fancy, just practical cotton dresses and sturdy boots, but all of it new and clean and far nicer than anything she owned. "Caleb, this is too much," she protested. "Pick out 2 dresses," he said firmly, "and new boots if yours are worn, and anything else you need. Please, Sarah, let me do this for you." She wanted to argue, but the longing in his eyes stopped her. This was important to him, she realized, not about the money or the things themselves, but about showing her that she was worth spending money on, worth caring for. So she swallowed her pride and selected 2 simple dresses, one in dark blue and one in green, and a pair of sturdy leather boots that actually fit properly. Caleb's smile when she agreed was worth more than all the gold in California. They also purchased a proper collar for Jasper, thick leather with a metal buckle, and the dog seemed absurdly proud of his new accessory. He pranced beside the wagon as they started the journey home, head held high, and Sarah and Caleb laughed at his antics. "Vain creature," Sarah said fondly. "He knows he is handsome," Caleb agreed. "Cannot fault him for that." The return journey felt different from the trip down. Lighter somehow, filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. They camped overnight in a small meadow, and after dinner, Caleb built up the fire and pulled out a battered harmonica from his saddlebag. "I did not know you played," Sarah said, settling onto her bedroll with Jasper curled at her side. "I'm not very good," Caleb admitted, "but it passes the time." He played simple melodies, folk songs, and military marches, and Sarah found herself humming along to the ones she recognized. The music floated up into the clear night sky, and she thought she had never seen stars so bright or felt so at peace. When Caleb finally set the harmonica aside, he looked across the fire at Sarah with an expression that made her breath catch. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it is perhaps too soon to say it, and I do not expect you to say it back, but I wanted you to know. I love you, Sarah Redford, and I want to marry you if you will have me." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. Marriage. The word should have terrified her. should have brought back all the memories of control and pain and loss of self. But looking at Caleb, at this good man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, she felt only hope. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I'm afraid of being that vulnerable again, of trusting someone with that much power over my life." "I understand," Caleb said quietly, "and I will wait as long as you need. But I promise you, Sarah, I would never use that power to hurt you. Marriage should be a partnership, not a prison. We would build our life together, make decisions together. You would not lose yourself by becoming my wife." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I have seen who you are when you are free to be yourself. You are strong and capable and fierce. I would not want to change that even if I could. I love you exactly as you are." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks and she brushed them away impatiently. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way about anyone, but I do. I love you, Caleb Winters." He was beside her in an instant, pulling her into his arms and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Jasper wormed his way between them, tail wagging frantically, and they both laughed through their tears at the dog's insistence on being included. "So is that a yes?" Caleb asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It is a yes to courting properly," Sarah said. "Let us take our time, do this right. But yes, I want to marry you. Someday soon." "I can work with someday soon," Caleb murmured, and kissed her properly, deep and sweet and full of promise. They returned to the cabin the next day, and life settled into a new rhythm. Sarah began wearing her new dresses, and Caleb's face, whenever he saw her in the green one, made her feel beautiful in a way she never had before. They continued their work with the furs and hides, building up stock for another trading run later in the summer. And they talked endlessly about their future together. Caleb wanted to expand the cabin, add on a larger bedroom, and maybe a proper kitchen area. Sarah suggested a chicken coop and a bigger garden. They debated whether to stay in the high country year-round or spend winters at a lower elevation. Small, mundane conversations that felt monumental, because they were planning a shared life, a shared future. And through it all, Jasper remained a constant presence. The dog had truly become Sarah's shadow, following her everywhere and standing guard whenever Caleb left to check trap lines. Caleb continued training him, and by midsummer, Jasper could perform an impressive array of tasks. He could alert to approaching strangers from a quarter-mile away. He could track game through the forest. He could even retrieve specific items by name, a trick that never failed to amuse Sarah. "You have trained him better than any dog I have ever seen," she told Caleb one July afternoon as they watched Jasper patrol the perimeter of their property with focused intensity. "He is smart, and he wants to please you," Caleb said. "That makes him easy to work with. But more than that, he loves you. Everything he does is to protect you and make you happy." "I think he loves you too now," Sarah observed. It was true. Jasper had bonded with Caleb almost as strongly as with Sarah, following the mountain man around when she was busy with other tasks, sleeping at the foot of Caleb's chair in the evenings. "The feeling is mutual," Caleb said, reaching down to scratch behind Jasper's ears when the dog trotted over for attention. "He is a good boy, the best." In early August, a traveling preacher passed through the area, and Sarah and Caleb made the decision to marry without further delay. They had no family to invite, no money for a fancy celebration, but they did not need any of that. They stood together in the small clearing in front of Caleb's cabin, with Jasper sitting at attention between them and the preacher reading from a worn Bible, and exchanged vows that came straight from the heart. "I promise to protect you and provide for you," Caleb said, his large hands wrapped around Sarah's smaller ones. "I promise to respect your strength and never try to diminish it. I promise to love you as my equal and partner in all things. This I swear." Sarah's voice shook only slightly as she replied, "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to trust you with my heart, even when fear tells me not to. I promise to build a life with you built on honesty and mutual respect. This I swear." The preacher pronounced them married, and Caleb kissed her with such tenderness that Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks again. But these were happy tears, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming gratitude that she had been given this second chance at life and love. That night, Caleb carried her over the threshold of what was now truly their shared home, and they celebrated their union with a gentleness and passion that erased the last of Sarah's fears. This was what marriage was supposed to be, she realized. This partnership, this mutual pleasure, this sense of being cherished and valued. Everything she had been denied before was now hers, and she had never felt so complete. The months that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. As summer faded into autumn, they worked together to prepare for the coming winter, stockpiling food and firewood and making repairs to the cabin. Caleb built the addition he had promised, creating a larger bedroom with space for a proper bed and storage. Sarah tended their expanded garden and preserved everything they grew in neat rows of jars that lined the new shelves Caleb constructed. And Jasper continued to thrive, growing into a magnificent animal with a thick coat and powerful build. He had become absolutely devoted to both Sarah and Caleb, but his primary allegiance remained with Sarah. Whenever she left the cabin, even to walk to the creek for water, Jasper was beside her. When she worked in the garden, he lay nearby, watchful. When she slept, he slept on the floor beside her side of the bed, one ear always cocked for potential danger. "I think he might love you more than I do," Caleb joked one evening as they watched Jasper refuse to leave Sarah's side even when Caleb called him for dinner. "Impossible," Sarah said, but she was smiling. "Though I'm very glad I found him, or he found me, however it happened." "However it happened," Caleb agreed, pulling her close. "That dog brought us together. I will be grateful to him for the rest of my life." The first snow came in late October, light flurries that dusted the valley in white. Sarah stood on the porch watching it fall, remembering the desperate fear of last winter when she had been alone and barely surviving. How different everything was now. She had a strong cabin, plentiful supplies, a devoted dog, and a husband who loved her. The contrast was almost overwhelming. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" "How much can change in a single year," Sarah said softly. "Last winter I was certain I would not survive. I was ready to give up, and then Jasper showed up and everything changed." "He is a special dog," Caleb agreed. "But you are the one who saved him, Sarah. You took him in when you could barely feed yourself. You gave him a chance when most people would have turned him away. He may have brought us together, but you were the catalyst for all of it." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "I used to think I was unlucky, that the universe had cursed me with hardship after hardship. But now I think maybe I was just being prepared for this, for you. All those hard years taught me how to survive, how to be strong. And that strength is what allowed me to take the risk of coming to you for help, of letting you into my life." "Then I am grateful for your strength," Caleb said, kissing her forehead, "even though I hate that you had to develop it through suffering." "The suffering is over now," Sarah said with certainty. "We have each other, and we have a good life here. That is all I need." Winter settled in properly over the following weeks, transforming the valley into a wonderland of snow and ice. But unlike the previous year, Sarah faced it without fear. The cabin was warm and secure, their food stores were abundant, and she was not alone. She and Caleb fell into easy rhythms, dividing the labor of maintaining their homestead. He hunted and trapped and kept them supplied with fresh meat. She cooked and mended and continued to work on tanning hides. Together they told stories by the fire, played cards and checkers, and made plans for the spring. Jasper adapted to the snow with enthusiasm, bounding through the drifts and rolling in the powder like a puppy despite his size. He had grown into a truly impressive dog, easily 70 pounds of muscle and thick fur with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Caleb had trained him to pull a small sled, and they used him to help transport firewood from the distant woodpile to the cabin. "He is earning his keep," Caleb said with approval after Jasper completed several successful sled runs without supervision. "He has always earned his keep," Sarah corrected, "even when all he did was keep me company. Sometimes that is enough." But Jasper proved his worth in more dramatic fashion one January night when he woke Sarah from a sound sleep with urgent barking. She sat up immediately, heart pounding, and saw that Caleb was already reaching for his rifle. "What is it, boy?" Caleb asked quietly. Jasper growled low in his throat, his attention fixed on the door. Caleb moved carefully toward the window and peered out into the darkness. "Wolves," he said tersely. "A pack of them circling the cabin. They must be desperate to come this close to human habitation." Sarah joined him at the window and counted at least 6 large shapes moving through the snow. Her mouth went dry. Wolves were dangerous even when not starving, and these looked gaunt and desperate. "Stay inside," Caleb ordered. "Keep Jasper with you. I'm going to fire a few warning shots. Try to scare them off." "Be careful," Sarah pleaded, grabbing his arm. He kissed her quickly. "Always." Caleb slipped out onto the porch, and Sarah heard the crack of rifle fire. The wolves scattered but did not flee far. Through the window, she could see them regrouping at the edge of the clearing, their eyes reflecting the lamplight from the cabin. Jasper was nearly frantic, whining and pacing, clearly wanting to go out and defend his territory. Sarah held his collar, keeping him inside. "Easy, boy. Caleb will handle it." But one of the wolves, bolder or hungrier than the rest, rushed toward the porch. Caleb fired and missed in the dark, and the wolf kept coming. Without thinking, Sarah released Jasper's collar. The dog shot through the door like a furry missile, slamming into the wolf with devastating force. "Jasper, no!" Sarah screamed, but the dog was already engaged. Caleb fired again, and this time he hit his target. The wolf yelped and retreated. Jasper chased it to the edge of the clearing, barking ferociously, and the entire pack finally broke and ran. The dog stood at the perimeter, hackles raised and teeth bared, making it clear that he would defend his home to the death if necessary. "Jasper, come!" Caleb commanded, and the dog reluctantly obeyed, trotting back to the porch. Sarah ran outside despite the cold, dropping to her knees to check Jasper for injuries. "Are you hurt? Let me see you." The dog submitted to her examination, tail wagging now that the danger had passed. She found a few scratches, but nothing serious. Relief made her weak. "He is fine," Caleb said, helping her to her feet. "Brave and foolish, but fine. Though you scared 10 years off my life running out here without even a coat." Sarah realized she was shivering violently, dressed only in her nightgown. Caleb swept her up and carried her back inside, wrapping her in blankets by the fire. Jasper pressed against her legs, and she buried her fingers in his fur. "That was terrifying," she whispered. "That was your dog proving exactly how devoted he is to you," Caleb said. "He would have fought the entire pack if needed. I should not have let him go. You gave him the chance to do what he was born to do, protect his family. He is fine, Sarah. We are all fine." The wolves did not return, and by morning their tracks were already being covered by fresh snow. But the incident reminded Sarah of just how isolated and vulnerable they were out here, and how much she relied on both Caleb and Jasper for her safety. "We are a good team," she told them both over breakfast. "All 3 of us." "The best team," Caleb agreed, slipping Jasper an extra piece of bacon. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Sarah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses twice, and her body felt different in subtle ways she could not quite define. She waited to tell Caleb until she was certain, not wanting to raise hopes that might be disappointed. But when March arrived and she still had not bled, she knew. One evening as they prepared for bed, she took Caleb's hand and placed it over her still flat stomach. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said quietly. Caleb's eyes went wide, and a smile spread across his face that was brighter than the sun. Truly, I am almost certain." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with such care, as if she might break. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Sarah, you have made me the happiest man alive." Tears of joy streamed down her face. "I never thought I would get to have this. A child born from love, raised in a happy home. It feels like a miracle." "You are the miracle," Caleb said fiercely. "You and your strength and your courage. Our child is so lucky to have you as a mother." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Sarah's body changed, her belly swelling with new life, and Caleb was endlessly fascinated and protective. He insisted she not lift anything heavy. He brought her wildflowers and made sure she always had her favorite foods. And he talked to their unborn child constantly, his deep voice gentle as he told stories and made promises about the life they would build together. Jasper seemed to understand that something important was happening. He became even more protective of Sarah, rarely leaving her side and positioning himself between her and any potential threat. When she sat in the rocking chair Caleb built for her, Jasper would lie at her feet, his head resting on her swollen belly as if guarding the baby even before it was born. "He's going to be such a good big brother," Sarah said fondly, running her fingers through the dog's thick fur. "The best," Caleb agreed. "That child is going to be the most protected baby in Montana." In early October, when the aspens were turning gold and the first frost was touching the high peaks, Sarah went into labor. Caleb had arranged for a midwife from the settlement to come stay with them for the final weeks of pregnancy, and the woman proved her worth as Sarah labored through the long night. It was hard and painful and frightening, but Caleb never left her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And when dawn broke and their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Sarah felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Sarah's chest. "A big, healthy boy." "He is perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she studied the tiny face, the shock of dark hair, the flailing fists. Caleb was crying too, unashamed as he reached out to touch their son's tiny hand. "He is beautiful. You did so well, Sarah. I am so proud of you." They named him James, after Caleb's father, and from the moment he was born, he was adored. Caleb was a natural father, gentle despite his size, equally comfortable changing diapers as he was chopping firewood. And Jasper took his role as guardian seriously, stationing himself beside the baby's cradle and growling if anyone but Sarah or Caleb approached. "Overprotective Mutt," Sarah said fondly, but she was grateful for the dog's vigilance. The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming joy. Sarah had worried she would not know how to be a good mother, that her own childhood experiences would leave her lacking, but the love she felt for her son was instinctive and fierce. And Caleb was an equal partner in parenting, never treating childcare as solely women's work. They were a family now, complete and whole, and Sarah marveled daily at how far she had come from that desperate, frightened woman who had taken in a stray dog 2 years earlier. When James was old enough to sit up on his own, Jasper would lie beside him, patient as the baby grabbed fistfuls of fur and babbled nonsense. When James learned to crawl, Jasper would herd him away from the fireplace and other dangers. And when James took his first wobbling steps at 10 months old, it was Jasper's solid body he used for balance, tiny fingers gripping the dog's fur as he learned to walk. "He loves that dog almost as much as he loves us," Caleb observed one afternoon, watching James and Jasper play together in the grass outside the cabin. "Jasper is family," Sarah said simply. "He has been since the day he showed up on my doorstep. I cannot imagine our lives without him." "Neither can I," Caleb agreed, pulling her close. "That Mutt saved your life, led you to me, and now he is helping raise our son. We owe him everything." Sarah leaned into her husband's solid warmth, watching their child laugh and play, and felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her life now, this happiness, this security, this love. It had been hard-won through years of suffering and struggle, but that made it all the more precious. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth when James was 2, and then another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. Their cabin expanded with their family, and the valley that had once felt isolated now felt like a sanctuary. Caleb proved to be an excellent provider, his hunting and trapping supplemented by a small trade in the beautifully tanned hides Sarah produced. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, with enough to feed their growing family and even save a little for the future. And through it all, Jasper remained a constant presence. He grew older and slower, his muzzle turning gray, but his devotion never wavered. He still slept beside Sarah's side of the bed every night. He still followed her from room to room during the day. And he had appointed himself the official guardian of the children, watching over them with the same fierce protectiveness he had always shown Sarah. "He is getting old," Sarah said sadly one evening when Jasper was 8, watching the dog struggle to climb the porch steps that had never given him trouble before. "He is," Caleb agreed gently. "But he has had a good life, Sarah. You gave him that." "He gave me so much more," Sarah whispered. "He gave me everything." 2 years later, on a cool autumn morning, much like the one when he had first appeared, Jasper died peacefully in his sleep beside Sarah's bed. She found him when she woke, still and cold, and her grief was overwhelming. Caleb held her as she sobbed, and even the children, who had never known life without Jasper, cried for the loss of their furry guardian. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley with a simple wooden marker that Caleb carved with care. Jasper, loyal friend, beloved guardian, he never left her side. Sarah stood at the grave long after the rest of the family had returned to the cabin, remembering everything. The scared, half-starved Mutt who had shown up during her darkest hour. The way he had given her a reason to keep going when she had been ready to give up. How he had guarded her and loved her and, in his way, led her to the life she now lived. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, "for everything. I will never forget you." Caleb came back up the hill to stand beside her, sliding his arm around her waist. "You gave him a good life." "He gave me a better one," Sarah said. "That stray Mutt saved me in every way a person can be saved." They stood together in silence, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become their home. And Sarah knew that even though Jasper was gone, his impact would remain forever. He had taught her about love and loyalty and second chances. He had protected her and her family with unwavering devotion. And he had been, in every way that mattered, the catalyst for all the happiness she now possessed. The years continued to unfold. James grew into a strong, capable young man with his father's build and his mother's determination. Elizabeth became a skilled hunter and tracker, learning everything Caleb could teach her. Thomas inherited his mother's gift for working with leather and developed his own trade in saddles and tack. The family thrived, bound together by love and mutual respect. Sarah and Caleb grew old together in their mountain valley, weathering storms and celebrating joys, always partners and equals. They added grandchildren to their legacy, filling the cabin with noise and laughter and life. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, Sarah would walk up the hill to Jasper's grave and tell him about everything he had missed, knowing somehow that he was still watching over her, still guarding her, still the loyal companion who had never left her side when it mattered most. On her 70th birthday, surrounded by 3 generations of family in the cabin that had become home, Sarah looked around at the life she had built and felt nothing but gratitude. She had survived darkness and found light. She had lost herself and been found. And all of it, every beautiful moment of it, had started with a half-starved Mutt who had shown up on her doorstep one desperate winter and chosen her. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his hair white now, but his dark eyes still sharp and loving. "About how lucky I am," Sarah said, taking his weathered hand in hers. "About how one small act of kindness can change everything." "You taking in Jasper, you mean?" "Him taking in me," Sarah corrected. "He found me when I needed finding. He guarded me when I needed guarding. And he led me straight to you. I could not have asked for a better friend." Caleb smiled and kissed her temple. "He was a good dog, the very best." "He was family," Sarah said firmly, "and he will always be remembered as such." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah closed her eyes and thought of that long-ago winter, of the scared woman she had been, and the journey that had brought her here. She thought of Jasper's amber eyes watching her with devotion, of his solid warmth beside her through long nights and dangerous days, and she thought of how love could come from the most unexpected places, changing everything in ways both small and profound. That Mutt had never left her side, not really. He lived on in the stories she told her grandchildren, in the values of loyalty and devotion she had learned from him, in the very foundations of the life she had built. And when her time finally came to leave this world, many years later, Sarah's last thought was of a scruffy dog waiting for her on the other side, tail wagging, ready to guard her into whatever came next. But that was far in the future still. For now she had her family, her home, and her memories. She had Caleb beside her, still strong despite his years, still the man who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. And she had the legacy of a stray Mutt who had taught her that sometimes the greatest love comes not from those we choose, but from those who choose us. The mountain valley where they had built their life continued to thrive, sheltering generations of their family. And on the hill where Jasper lay buried, wildflowers grew thick and beautiful, a living testament to the dog who had saved a woman's life, and, in doing so, created a legacy of love that would endure long after both of them were gone. Sarah Winters, formerly Redford, lived to the age of 78, surrounded by love and respect and the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. Caleb followed her 3 years later, and they were buried side by side on the hill next to Jasper, their grave markers weathered by time but still standing strong. Their children continued the legacy, teaching their own children the values of hard work, loyalty, and love. The story of Jasper became family legend, told and retold around fires and dinner tables, growing more mythic with each generation, but always true in the ways that mattered. He had been a good dog. He had saved a woman's life. He had guarded her and loved her and never left her side. And in the end, that loyalty had created something beautiful and lasting, a family bound not just by blood but by the understanding that love in all its forms was worth protecting. The cabin still stood generations later, expanded and modernized, but fundamentally the same shelter that had protected Sarah and Caleb through those early years. And on clear autumn mornings, when the aspens turned gold and the air held the first hint of winter's approach, those who knew the story could almost see them. A woman and a dog and a mountain man building something precious in the wilderness, creating love from loneliness and hope from despair. It was a simple story, really. A woman took in a stray. The stray loved her. That love led her to a man. Together, they built a life. But in its simplicity lay profound truth about the nature of devotion, about second chances, about how the smallest act of kindness can ripple outward in ways we cannot imagine. Jasper had been just a mutt, scared and starving when he found Sarah's doorstep. But he had also been exactly what she needed, a reason to keep going, a companion through dark times, and ultimately a guide toward the happiness she deserved. He had trained himself to guard her cabin and her heart, and in return, she had given him a home and a purpose and all the love he could have ever wanted. That mutt never left her side, not truly. Even after death, his presence lingered in every corner of the life Sarah had built, in every lesson she taught her children about loyalty and love, in every moment of happiness she experienced with Caleb. He had been the first to show her what devotion looked like, and that lesson had shaped everything that came after. The Wild West was a hard place, full of danger and uncertainty, where survival often trumped sentiment. But it was also a place where bonds forged in adversity could become unbreakable, where love could bloom in unexpected places, and where a stray dog and a desperate woman could find each other at exactly the right moment and change each other's lives forever. Sarah's story, Caleb's story, Jasper's story, they were all the same story, really. A story about finding family in the wilderness, about choosing each other when the world felt impossibly harsh, about building something beautiful from the broken pieces of what came before, and about the enduring power of a love so pure and simple that it transcended species and circumstance to create something truly extraordinary. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the hardships or the struggles, not the cold winters or the dangerous moments. What mattered was that they had found each other, that they had chosen each other, that they had built a life together filled with love and laughter and the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong, with exactly who you belong with. The mountains stood eternal, watching over the valley where this story had unfolded. The seasons turned, as they always had and always would. And somewhere in the fabric of time and memory, a woman and a dog and a mountain man walked together through an autumn afternoon, their bond unbreakable, their love eternal, their story a testament to the power of choosing kindness even when the world offers every reason not to. Jasper had been a good dog, the very best. And Sarah had been lucky enough to recognize that, to cherish it, and to build a life worthy of the gift he had given her. That mutt had never left her side, and she had never wanted him to. In the end, that was all that mattered. They had found each other. They had loved each other. And that love had created ripples that would last forever, touching lives not yet born, inspiring stories not yet told, proving that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the smallest step toward kindness and compassion. The legacy endured, passed down through generations, a reminder that in the hardest times and the loneliest places, love can still find a way. And sometimes that love comes in the most unexpected form. A scruffy mutt with amber eyes and a heart full of devotion, showing up exactly when needed most, ready to guard and protect and love without reservation or condition. That was Jasper's gift. That was Sarah's salvation. That was the foundation upon which everything beautiful in her life was built. And she never forgot it, never took it for granted, never stopped being grateful for the day a half-starved dog appeared on her doorstep and chose her, claimed her, and loved her with the fierce, unwavering devotion that only the best dogs can offer. In the Wild West of 1878, in the mountain valleys of Montana, a woman named Sarah found her way from darkness into light. She was guided by a dog named Jasper and loved by a man named Caleb, and together, the three of them created something that would outlast them all, a story of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that form when wounded souls find each other and choose, despite everything, to heal together. That mutt never left her side again, and Sarah never wanted him to. That was enough. That was everything. That was the whole story, and it was perfect exactly as it was.